Hello, this is Margaret Fetty from the University of Sewing at the Tailored Fit, and I thought I would show you a really simple, quick way to put binding on knit garments that will take you no time at all, and it's going to make you really happy because they look wonderful. So we're going to start off with this lovely Indonesian batik knit that I have for sale at our shop, and I decided to make one of our patterns that we have for this. We have Pamela Leggett's patterns, and we have her swing tunic, and this is what this is. And I decided to make it without the sleeves. So what I've got here is we're going to be talking about our neckline and our armholes. So I didn't use the sleeves in this, and so now I just had to bind my armholes and my neckline. And what I did was cut my knit on the stretchy part of it. And you can cut your knit on the bias if you need to. If your knit doesn't have enough stretch in the cross grain, you can always do it on the bias if that's needed. So I've cut a strip of this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that strip and I'm going to sew it to my armhole, right sides of my fabric together. And there are right sides and wrong sides to knit, so pay attention to that. So I used a serger right here, but you could do that also with a 1/4 inch seam, and you could do it with your lightning stitch. And if you're not familiar with your lightning stitch, it's a tiny zigzag, and that would be a good stitch on your home domestic sewing machine. So there we go. Do our 1/4 inch seam right here. Once we have that, then what we're going to do is we're going to put this seam allowance into the binding so it has some place to look nice and crisp. And look how pretty that looks right there. So, and if you come back over here, this one's already completed, and see how that's all filled out, and that creates a really nice binding. And see that set of stitching right there? Hopefully you can see it. There's a set of stitching right here. That's the next step that I'm going to show you how to do on your sewing machine. So we're going to go back over to this part here that we just did the binding. It's only sewn on, and we wrap it around the arm, putting that seam allowance in there. And then you're going to put a pin, run it right along that edge right there. And I'm using my fingers to wrap that, push that seam allowance, that serging into the binding. And we're going to put pins in there to hold that. And it seems like that if you put a pin about every 3 to 4 inches, that holds it really nicely. And then you don't have to worry about that seam allowance popping out of your binding. And because what you don't want it to do is sit over here. You want it to be in the binding so it all looks consistent. So we've got that wrapped in there. And we're going to put 2 more pins in this, and then we're going to sew it. And what I did with my sewing machine, how I've set up my sewing machine is, number 1, I am using a stretch needle. You want to use a stretch needle with your knits because then your stitches won't skip. So we're going to use a stretch needle. We're going to move our needle position. We're going to move it, since we're going to put our foot on the binding, we're going to move the needle so it runs right beside the binding. So we're going to wrap you around here so you can see. I'm using an open-toed foot so that I have plenty of room to move my needle around. And down comes my needle right beside that binding. And we're going to hold our bobbin and needle thread. You know, a lot of people end up with thread nests when they first start sewing because they don't hold their upper and lower threads. And that is, you know, sewing machines today run really fast. So if you're not holding these threads, it's real easy for them to get sucked into the machine and make a mess. So let's not do that. Let's prevent some frustration. I'm going forward with just a plain straight stitch. Now, if you need lots of stretch in your armhole, you can use that mini zigzag that I was talking about a few moments ago instead of a straight stitch. So there we go. We're getting that all on there. We're going to take that needle and get it out of our way. And we're running our stitching right beside the binding. So right there. And notice every once in a while I might lift up my presser foot a little bit to adjust things. So not a big deal. You can always do that when your needle's in. See how my needle's in the fabric? Then I can adjust things and it's not hard to do. Now if my needle had come up out of the fabric and then I lifted up my foot, that's a little more problematic. You can't keep your fabric and everything laying quite the way you want to. And if you noticed, I went slower in that one area we just came from. That's because it was more curved. This is far straighter. It's doing a nice job there. There we go. We are almost done. And then we have one small part of this project left to do. And again, we're in a nice straight zone, no big curves going on. We're coming back to the curvy part with the underarm. So we're probably gonna have to slow down a little bit there. There we go. And we are good to go. We have just finished. I'm gonna trim my threads. Now, very last part of this, see we have all this extra. So all we're going to do is we're going to be careful here because we don't want to cut our top. So we're going to cut this away, and you can cut it pretty close to your stitching. See, look at that. Now that's cut away. There's our stitching. Nice and neat by the right beside there. Now, you know, it went away a little bit, but you know what? If you match your thread colors perfectly, nobody will ever see that. So what we'll do is we'll trim that all away. Then we will sew our side seams. I don't know if you noticed, but I hadn't sewn my side seams yet. And the reason I did that is because it's a lot easier to put binding on when something's flat. So the next thing I have to do is sew my side seams after this is all trimmed away. And then all I have left to do is hem it. And I can get one of these little tops done in less than 2 hours, from cutting it out to sewing it all together. If you have a serger, it makes it a lot faster. We have some fabulous sergers at the University of Sewing right now. Lowest prices Bernina's ever had them for. $7.99 for our 450 and $9.99 for our 460s. If you ever want to come in and see these in action, I'll be happy to demo them for you. But in the meantime, I hope that you will think about making a nice little knit top for yourself and look at it. I can do it either on my sewing machine or I can do it with combined with my serger, and I'm in good shape. I hope all of you enjoyed this and you have a great day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.